Salvete Discipuli. Today we are going to do chapter 23 in Wheelock's Latin. This chapter is on participles and participial phrases. These are very, very, very common pieces of grammar in Latin literature. In fact, Roman authors and Latin speakers, presumably, preferred using participles because you can get a lot of meaning out of just one participle, one word. And as we know and as we've discussed, the Romans like to practice what we call an economy of language, meaning they like to use as few words to say as much as possible. Participles are great for that. Okay, so let's talk about participles first, and the most basic question, what's a participle? The most basic definition is that participles are verbal adjectives. So they function as adjectives, but they have certain aspects of verbs. Most importantly, they have tense and they have voice, okay? Like adjectives, they have case, number, and gender because they need to be able to decline so that they can describe various nouns in the sentence, right? More on that in a second. Let's just get now to the basics of participles. There are a total of 4 participles in Latin, okay? There is the present active participle, the perfect passive participle, and then there's the future active and passive. So what you'll notice from this chart is that there is no such thing as a present passive participle, right? There's no such thing as a perfect active participle. There is only present active, perfect passive, and future active and passive, okay? This box right here, the future passive participle, is also called a gerundive. So you should know that this form, also known as the gerundive, that'll become important. And we'll talk more about the verb to be in a second. So, once you know how many participles there are, you have to know how to form them. For the present active and future passive, you need your present stem. For the perfect passive and future active, you need your fourth principal part, okay? So, present active, you need your present stem plus the endings -ns in the nominative singular and -ntis in the genitive singular. And present active participles translate as somethinging, right? Blanking. Okay, so running, singing, walking, doing, speaking, any of those things, okay? The perfect passive participle is the fourth principal part. So if you change the ending on the fourth principal part to match a noun in the sentence, then you have the perfect passive participle. Perfect passive participles translate as having been blanked, okay? So a song having been sung, a word having been spoken, a course having been run, so on and so forth, okay? Future active participle is the fourth principal part, but instead of us, you have to add urus, ura, urum, and that makes sense, right? The future, you are in future, active participle is urus, ura, urum, with that you are also in the endings, okay? We translate future active participles as about to do something, right? About to blank, so about to sing, about to dance, about to speak, so on and so forth. And the present passive participle, also known as the gerundive, is formed with the present stem plus ndus, nda, ndum. So again, gerundive has ndus as part of its formation. And we translate future passive participles about to be blanked, okay? So about to be spoken, about, or about to be read, about to be learned, okay? So that is how you form it. The verb to be, SA, only has a future active participle, right? So futurus, futura, futurum, about to be. This is obviously where we get the word future, right? Futura, neuter plural, are things about to be. And the verb posse only has the present active participle potens, potentis, which is also, of course, the adjective powerful, so being able or powerful. I go through these next couple of slides and give you examples from each conjugation. So first conjugation, laudo, laudare, laudavi, laudatum. Laudans, laudantis, so nominative, genitive, so praising, okay? Perfect passive, laudautus, laudata, laudatum, having been praised. Laudatoris, laudatora, laudatorum, about to praise. And laudandus, laudanda, laudandum, about to be praised, okay? Video, videre, vidi, visum, second conjugation, vides, vidente, seeing, visus, viso, visum, visorus, visora, visorum, videndus, videnda, videndum. And again, you should be writing these down in your notes. Don't just look through these or skip through this part of the video. Pause it and write these down as your notes so that you have this reference guide to go to should you have some questions. Third, third IO, and fourth. Our present stem, of course, is just ag, but we add the e, okay, to get the present active participle. So agens, agentus. Actus, acta, actum, right? Driving, having been driven. Actoris, actora, actorum, about to drive or do, whatever, doing. And then agendus, agenda, agendum, about to be driven or about to be done. Obviously, we get the word agenda there. And again, it's neuter plural, so the things to be done. For third IO and fourth, when you get your present stem, which is this cap, you add the IE, so it's capiens, capientus, right, taking. Coptus, copta, coptum, fourth principal part, coptorus, coptora, coptorum, and capiendus, capienda, capiendum. Well, that just leaves us with our fourth conjugation, audio, audire, audivi, auditum. So audiens, audientus is hearing. Auditus, audita, auditum, having been heard. Auditoris, auditora, auditorum, about to hear. And audiendus, audienda, audiendum, about to be heard. Okay. A couple things to remember about participles. Because they are verbal adjectives, they describe nouns or pronouns. But they can also be substantive, okay? Just like a regular adjective can be substantive, so can a participle. So they have to be able to decline, right? So that they can be put into any possible gender, number, and case, so that they can fulfill the duty of an adjective. Okay, 3 of the participles decline as first, second declensions, okay? The perfect passive, future active, and future passive. They're just us, just like, you know, endings you've known forever at this point, right? E-I-E, O-I-O, so on and so forth. The present active participle, however, as you can tell, follows the third declension, I stem, although the ablative singular sometimes can end in an E. So again, audiens is the nominative plural, audientis is the genitive, nominative singular, audientis is the genitive singular. So this IS ending tells you that we're in the third declension. So present active is going to decline as a third declension I stem, with the exception of the ablative singular, which does sometimes have an E instead of an I. But perfect passive, future active, future passive, all first, second declensions. I just give you a little reminder here. Remember that the participle, like any other adjective, can be describing the pronoun that is in the verb, right? The he or she or it, the you, the they, the we, whatever. The subject that we get from the verb, the pronoun subject that we get from the verb, a participle can describe that. So keep that in mind. In this next chart, I show you a full declension of how this participle declines. The present active participle only. Obviously, this is the present active participle. So I would like for you guys to write this down so you know. If you have a present active participle in the dative singular, it's going to be agenti, okay? If you have it in the neuter plural accusative, it's going to be agentia, but neuter plural feminine is going to be agentes. So write out this chart is important. Okay, now that we know how to form them, now that we know how to decline them, let's talk about translating participles, okay? Obviously, you have to translate them based on their tense and voice. for the most part. We'll talk about that more actually in a slide that's coming up in a second. But you also need to identify what noun the participle is describing. Okay, you need to identify if the participle is describing the subject of the verb. The subject is, in the verb, that's implicit in the verb. You need to decide if this participle is substantive. So let's look at a couple examples. Senator currens ex urbe fuget, okay? Look at your participle here, currens. We can tell from the ending that it's present active. We can also tell from the ending that it is nominative singular masculine. Well, it's nominative singular. We know it's going to be masculine because the only other nominative singular in here is senator. So it's the senator who is running, right? The running senator flees from the city. Okay? In the second example, coptus nihil dixit, coptus is our perfect passive participle, right? Because it's the fourth principal part. This US ending tells us that it's nominative singular, masculine, but there's no other nominative masculine singular noun in the sentence to be the noun that coptus is describing. So instead, it is describing the he that we get from dixit. So he, having been captured, dixit nihil, said nothing. Okay? Hostes Romanum fugientum praeserunt. Again, we have fugientum, present active. The present tends to have the nt in it. It is accusative singular. We actually do have an accusative singular, masculine, for it to be describing. So the enemy pursued the fleeing Roman, right? The fleeing Roman. And then in our last example, auxilium patentibus semper dabitur. Patentibus is our participle. There is no other dative plural noun for it to be describing, so it has to be substantive. Help will always be given patentibus to those seeking it. And yes, that might be a little Harry Potter-ish. Now, the next thing you need to know about participles is that a participle, because it is verbal, can take a direct object, an ablative or agent, or anything, ablative of means, anything that you can put in a predicate, okay? So when you have a participle and the participle has a predicate, has things that it's governing, that is called a participial phrase, okay? When you translate participles for participial phrases, the tense is not absolute. It's not like you always translate a present active ing necessarily. Instead, you need to think about the tense of the participle in relation to the main verb. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you have a present participle, that's not telling you necessarily that you translate the participle as a present. It's telling you you translate the participle as occurring at the same time as the main verb. But a perfect passive participle tells you that the participle occurred prior to the main verb. And obviously, a future participle tells you that the participle happened after the main verb. Okay? Here's the thing. We do not use participles or participial phrases in English nearly as much as they did in Latin. Okay? So, to our ears, participial phrases can sound pretty weird, right? For that reason, we often, instead of translating a participial phrase as a participial phrase, we translate it as a subordinate clause. So what that means is that instead of translating a participial phrase like having seen the prank or something like that, weird, that's what came to my head. Instead, we would translate it as a subordinate clause introduced either by since, when, or although. So since we saw the prank or something like that. Or we would translate it sometimes as a relative clause. Sometimes the participial phrase sounds best as a participial phrase too. It's just one of those things. You have to sort of figure it out as you go along. So I'm going to have to go very quickly through this because we're almost out of time for this video. But Here, I'll just skip to the actual answer. So I give you a couple of examples of how to translate given sentences as a participial phrase that's italicized or as a subordinate clause or relative